Welcome to the France 24 interview. I'm Stephen Carroll. In 2010, the Supreme Court of the United States made a decision that completely changed the way that election campaigns are financed. The ruling paved the way for the creation of Super PAC funding committees, and particularly for companies to contribute unlimited amounts to their candidate of choice. My guest today is the journalist Guillaume Debré, who's worked in the United States as a journalist for both French and American media organisations for over a decade. He's written a book called Washington: How Money Ruined American Democracy, which looks at this issue of campaign financing. Guillaume Debré, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
On France 24. Now, money plays a part in politics everywhere in the world, but you say that the United States is a particular situation, and particularly in this election. Why is that?
Well, mainly because it is unregulated. The amount of money you can spend in an election is astonishing. Just in 2016, just this year, all the candidates gathered who are going to run for president, the two last candidates, Trump and Hillary, but if you include all 21 of them, they are going to spend $3 billion, roughly between $2.5 and $3 billion. It is an enormous amount of money. And it's not just them collecting money and spending it. It's all those organizations that you called Super PAC. And those new organizations can spend unlimited amount of money on television, airing ads, and nobody can check exactly where the money comes from, or at least partly, and what do they do with that money. And this is, of course, extremely detrimental for the American democracy.
Well, how do you feel it's affected democracy? I mean, the ruling's been, as I said, was in 2010, so 6 years ago now. Even since 2012, though, the change has been pretty dramatic.
Dramatic in the amount of money people can raise. Dramatic in the fact that now you're not accountable for the message. There's a lot of organizations who are basically insulting candidates, who are airing ads that are extremely vicious and aggressive. It's changed the language of politics. It changed the tone of politics. And you see it percolates in the presidential election. Look at the tone of the 2016 election. Look at Donald Trump. Look at Hillary Clinton. They're extremely aggressive. And so this is one of the effects of the immense money that is being poured in this election cycle.
Now, you say in your book that this is damaging American democracy, and that's because you see that money is distorting the message that's coming, or it's the collection of money that's the issue?
There's two things. It has an effect on the political process, that's one thing. But also, if you spend that much money, you need to collect it. Candidates, and this time around, Hillary Clinton is going to spend far more time mingling, asking, begging for money to millionaires than meeting real people, than having town hall meetings, or than going out in the streets and meeting and talking to real people. That is a huge problem in the American democracy. But then you take Congress, which is a different matter. Now, congressmen are going to spend the sheer amount of time just raising money. If you take just a regular congressman, an average raise today, a congressman who's elected for 2 years has to raise $1.6 million, roughly. It's much more for certain raise, less for others, but that's an average. That means he has to raise $10,000 a day. He spends 2, 3, 4 hours a day on the phone collecting money. In that time, he's not doing his job as crafting legislation, hearing constituents. So it really distorts the American political process.
There's an argument too, though, that the American politicians also have sufficient support staff. You know, how much work politicians actually do in drafting legislation, so much of it's done by advisors around them. Is the politician really needed to spend more time on the issues that could be done by somebody else while they're perhaps out meeting more important people?
You're right. But one congressman I talked to told me that he often went to the House floor, the House of Representatives floor, to vote on legislation, and he was briefed on this piece of legislation in the car. He was raising money in a room at the Democratic National Committee, raising money for his re-election. He took a car ride. His advisor was waiting for him, took him to Congress, and he was briefing on the legislation and telling basically how to vote, which is in itself a problem. The second problem is, if they spend that much time talking to people who can give them money, it's often bankers, huge lobbies, pharmaceutical companies, all those big companies. They're telling them their point of view.
So who's losing out from that contact that those politicians are spending with those sorts of people?
Citizens and taxpayers. one example. One congressman I talked to sat on the House Committee for Financial Affairs. That was the committee in the House of Representatives who was in charge of overseeing the financial industry. When the Lehman Brothers and the financial crisis of 2008 broke, he was briefed by Hank Paulson, who was Secretary of Treasury at the time. He was actually crafting regulation, and he heard that word, CDS, those exotic subprime mortgages.
Credit default swaps.
Yeah. And he didn't know what it was. And he had to go on Wikipedia to check what it was. That means that all the people he had talked to when he was crafting legislation in the House Committee never mentioned that subject. Why? Because it was the bankers, it was the financial institution who were telling the congressman what they wanted to hear or what they wanted to tell them, so that they get money and they didn't craft the right legislation.
Now, in the book, you go through how this issue affects Hillary Clinton, how it affects Donald Trump, but you also talk about the role that Barack Obama, the outgoing president, had in shifting the kind of way that money is spent in campaigns in 2012. Tell us about that.
It's a very unfortunate and indirect consequence of a decision that Barack Obama took in 2008. There was regulation before 2000, and it's still in place actually, but there was a regulation that if you accept public money when you run for office, you had to cap your spending to a certain amount. So you couldn't spend over that amount. In 2008, President Obama Barack Obama decided that he's going to only finance his campaign through small donors, or big, but a lot of small donors. That means he will take only private money and would not take the public money. That means that he wouldn't be bound by any cap. He exploded basically the amount of money that he spent on this election in 2008, and it opened a Pandora box in a sense that nobody since then had took public money, and the amount of money that is being spent each cycle goes up and up and up, and it's almost indefinite. Now it's $3 billion. It's unprecedented.
Now, the situation for Bernie Sanders in the Democratic primaries was different because he did attract a lot of smaller donors. And how did that affect his prospects?
Well, he was his main motto. It was his main campaign theme. I won't be bound by money, and I won't give in to special interest and basically be the spokesperson of special interest. So I won't take their money from what you were talking about, the Super PAC. So he was only financed by small donors. What it affected is he had extremely a vast amount of support. He could challenge Hillary Clinton. But what it tells you is something different, is that people are fed up with the system. The fact that an old socialist of 72 years old was able to challenge the former First Lady, former Secretary of State, and who was basically the candidate of the establishment, mean that even within the ranks of Democrats, people are fed up with the system. She embodied the big money, big constituent establishment candidacy. He embodied an insurgency candidacy, which is, I'm fed up with the system. It's not fair. The dice are rolled against you. I'm going to fix it. And his motto, his theme, caught on. So it tells you that people are extremely fed up by the system. And by the way, it was the same message that Donald Trump had. I'm not going to take any Super PAC money. I'm not going to take money from billionaires who want to tell me what I can do. Of course,
he's in a very different situation.
Yeah, he injected $50 million of his own money into the race. But that was a very similar discourse that he had that caught on the right, which is the system is not fair.
So you have pointed out how the lack of regulation has created the situation that exists now, but we see perhaps regulation coming from other areas and not from the Federal Election Commission. For example, Goldman Sachs has banned its partners from contributing to political campaigns. Is there perhaps a sense that there could be somewhere else that could recenter the way that elections are played out in the US?
Yeah, for sure, if the public system, the Federal Election Commission or other institution do not get involved and try to regulate the system. The private, and it's always the case in the US, the private is going to do that. But Goldman Sachs is only doing this for PR. They're spending an immense amount of money lobbying congressmen. So their own interest is actually, there's nothing wrong with lobbying, but they're spending an immense amount of money to get their point of view to congressmen. And of course, it affects the way congressmen view it. And you could see the piece of legislation, the famous Dodd-Frank Act that was passed to regulate the financial industry. the Goldman Sachs included, spent a lot of money convincing congressmen that their interest was having a not very tough regulation. So, of course, everybody realizes that there's a problem in the system. Goldman Sachs not doing this basically, or saying that they're going to prevent their partner, is not going to fix the system. But it tells you that there's a problem.
But is there an appetite to change the system?
I think there's an appetite from the people to change the system. Hillary Clinton has said that she's going to try to change Citizens United, the Supreme Court decision that you mentioned that was taken in 2010. And could happen is that if she's elected president, she could nominate a Supreme Court justice and the majority could change. But she's benefited from the system as well. So a lot of people extremely wealthy, have poured a lot of money into the democratic system. The problem is the system is structured between the Republican and the Democrat Party is that it favors the two parties. And there is no incentive to change it because, in a way, they can finance their own election. Sure enough, Republicans have more billionaires than Democrats, but the Democrats have also benefited from the system.
Okay, thank you, Guillaume Debré, journalist and author, for joining us here on France 24. Thank you for watching. Do stay tuned, more news coming up.